we're here at the labor negotiating meeting October 12th. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to Mike or Jessica. Jessica, I have one question for you. When this first started, you had requested me to keep your bills that you sent submitted. You following?
Yeah.
Okay, and Shar would like to retain them here in City Hall in a locked box. We had sent a couple emails back and forth. My interpretation of it is that you wanted me to keep them off-site. Is that true or no?
No. And the only reason this became an issue is because some of the bills obviously deal with issues that Shar is now involved in, and so we wanted to just maintain some separation there. So my practice has been to send a summary bill with no detail to Shar for processing, but I do think it's important for the city to have a record of the details. So you have been getting those detailed bills. I think if those are maintained on site in an appropriate place, that would be a good solution.
Maintained on-site in City Hall?
That's fine, yep.
Okay, well, okay, I mean, initially you had not wanted that. You wanted them off-site, but.
Well,
yeah.
I don't recall that we talked about that. My concern is that I think it's important there's a record of the detail, but
okay, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify it.
Yep.
So I'll bring the rest of those in to you, Shar.
How about the other issue with the promotion?
Oh, yeah. When we started these negotiations, also you said there's supposed to be no movement with employees. Follow that? That probably isn't stated correctly, but we're not supposed to do anything. And so yesterday there was a promotion for one of the police officers to be promoted to sergeant.
Which would put them in this union.
Filling a position, but I mean, so we kind of elected to wait and ask you if that is part of the no movement or if.
So folks, the purpose of our conversation today obviously is to talk about labor negotiations. That's how we noticed this meeting. If we're going to have a conversation about other things, obviously you've got employees and the union's lawyer in the room. We need to do that in a different way.
Okay, well, we'll just table it then. We'll take it up at another time. Okay?
Good morning, Joe.
Maybe I'm here now.
You look like you have antlers.
Position right in front of there. There we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll make a motion that we close this session.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Do I need to leave?
I'm not sure what's going on.
Jessica, do you want staff to leave then? If it's closed?
So my understanding of what we were doing this morning is we were going to have an open session to just review the proposals. We're not going to have any discussion. So,
Okay, I take my motion back. I didn't realize it was open.
yeah.
I thought it was closed. Take it back.
Motion withdrawn.
So we have.
No.
We have two proposals, is one from the union and one from the council?
Yep, so to get everybody started today, the purpose of this meeting is really just to sort of do some introductions and kind of talk about the process. Joe, who is the MNP lawyer, and I have worked offline to kind of talk about process. As you can imagine, when you're negotiating a first-time contract, it's a much more involved process than typical contract negotiations. So we have been in touch about sort of what would be an appropriate way to move forward, et cetera. And what we had talked about is, again, just today, sort of meeting everyone and kind of confirming who's going to be involved. And then Joe and I exchanged just kind of opening proposals in advance. The idea today was just to hit the highlights on those, but that we were not expecting either party to actually respond. We'll just do this initial session kind of to exchange the documents and meet the team. And then Joe will meet separately on a different day with his team, and I will meet separately with the city's team on a different day to sort of prepare for negotiations, and then we will move into in-person negotiation sessions from there. What I did is typically when we negotiate in person, I bring copies of proposals with me. Since I wasn't going to be there in person today, I asked Mike to distribute those. And then yesterday, Joe forwarded a document to me, so I asked Mike to forward that as well. He sent a new document this morning, so if Mike didn't see that, which he might not have, you might be looking at an older version.
I provided them the document that was from about 7:35 this morning from your email.
Yeah. So Joe sent a new one this morning, so we can distribute that and he can walk everybody through that. But why don't we start just with, could we just have everybody sort of take turns and introduce themselves?
Okay, I'm Dave Nevin, Mayor, 30-year resident of Cross Lake.
Aaron Herzog, City Council member.
Dave Schrupp, City Council member.
John Andrews, City Council member.
Marcia Seibert-Boltz, City Council.
I'm Mike Linus, City Administrator.
Eric Lee, Police Chief. John Colstead, Planning and Zoning Administrator.
That's everybody in the room. My name is Joe Ditch. I'm General Counsel for Minnesota Public Employees Association. So we represent public employees across the state of Minnesota, primarily essential unit employees. I've been doing this since about 2013 with the union. So we represent probably going on, I don't know, 1,700, maybe 2,000 employees across the state of Minnesota, 60 to 70 collective bargaining agreements. And with me today, I've got Alec Rolane. Alec, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Alec Rolane, Associate General Counsel with the Minnesota Public Employees Association. I work alongside Joe here.
And then I think we have Dave Deal on.
I'm Dave Deal. I'm the MNP president and one of the founding members when we started the union in 2011.
And good morning, everyone. To the people in the room who don't know me, nice to meet you. Joe and I have worked together over the years. I've been doing labor negotiations for something, I don't know, 20 years or so. But Joe and I have had occasion to work together in the past, and looking forward to doing that again and getting to know Joe and Alec as well. The city of Cross Lake, I have assisted with the labor negotiations for quite a few rounds of contract negotiations, has always had good labor relations with its employees and productive professional labor negotiation sessions. So I'm sure we will have that experience again. Again, just a little bit different here because we're starting from scratch, so there's more ground to cover. But I think Joe and I have a good process for getting us through that. Joe, do you want to start, or how would you like to proceed?
Yeah, so we are happy to start with our presentation. And again, I apologize. I apparently clicked the wrong version of the draft that I had sent to you, Jessica. So there may be some modifications as we're going through the document. At the outset, I'd like to state, though, that our interest here in establishing this first contract is primarily to capture the existing terms and conditions that these supervisors are working underneath. So, you know, for instance, we're in the middle of 2021, we're moving toward the end of it. You know, we recognize that the city had awarded some general increases to its employees for 2021. Whether we end up establishing a collective bargaining agreement that kind of closes out 2021 and then subsequent bargaining agreement for 22 and beyond, we're open to that idea. If we wanted to capture this initial period of 2021 in the initial bargaining agreement, that's fine too. So we're not pushing to increase and unsettle things that have already been established for this year. Certainly, we're hopeful that we can improve upon terms and conditions in outgoing years is our task. But we're happy to hear that you've had many years of good labor relations with your existing bargaining unit. Certainly, you know the players within the city even better than I do, right? But we've been working with your police chief, Eric, in order to get this thing started, and he is going to act as our steward and lead negotiator for this process. When the opportunity arises, he may have another member of the team join him for the negotiations. And again, before I even start going through the document, I want to point out that we are a member short. We have an acting sergeant in the bargaining unit. And so it's my understanding that permanent promotion has not been approved yet. I do anticipate that that'll have to be something that we discuss at some point in the near future because it is a member of the team. But as an acting sergeant, we recognize that he's not yet officially a member of the bargaining unit. So the draft that we had sent over, we had made an attempt to start with some terms and conditions that the city might be familiar with. So we took a look at the police contract, which is an essential bargaining unit contract. Jessica, I know you were aware of this and the distinctions made between essential and non-essential bargaining units and the terms that apply to each of them. So as an essential bargaining unit, this unit would have the right to arbitrate and not the right to strike. And there are some important differences that arise when it comes to dispute resolution in that. And I also note that this bargaining unit contains 2 peace officer positions. So I wanted to make a note of that as well as we get through this, that we may need to specifically address the changes to Minnesota statute as they relate to peace officer discipline arbitration and make sure that the language can accommodate those changes. As of today, we're under a status quo order, and we hope we can get through this process relatively quickly and efficiently. We recognize that both sides have large teams, however, and the need to discuss the proposals as we're walking through them. So unless there are any questions or comments, I think I'll just jump into our document. Okay. So beginning with the opening substantive articles. So I note that both of our proposals have a preamble and a recognition clause. So that is important in my mind in order to make sure that we're capturing who is in the bargaining unit who is not. I think both of our drafts recognize that it's all confidential and supervisory employees, excluding the city administrator and all others, which is a BMS recognition. If the city creates another position that is arguably supervisory, the union wants to be made aware of that creation and its placement on the wage scale and its inclusion in the bargaining unit within a reasonable period of time. Article 2, employer security. So MNP, we don't make a practice ever of trying to threaten strikes or propose things that are not realistic. We know that the employer serves a function and we serve a function. So we are going to make sure that the city continues to operate. And so we're not going to support any strike or anything of that nature. This bargaining unit has the right to arbitrate, and we freely wield that tool when it's necessary to do so. And so you will hear from us if there's a problem. But you don't have to worry about us going on picketing and going on strike. Management rights. I note that your management rights clause is longer than ours is. Not unexpected. So we're willing to work with the employer to capture its existing managerial rights. There are some clauses in statute that are permissive bargaining, and so we may or may not come to agreement on all of the inherent managerial rights that you have captured in your document. But as you see here, we do recognize that your right to operate and manage your affairs, but that you have to comply with applicable laws and regulations. On our side, union security, Article 4. Just so the city is aware, MNP obviously wants all of its employees to be full members of the union. We do ask that the union members pay dues and that those dues be forwarded to the union in a timely manner, along with a copy of the list or a list of employees that are paying dues. Membership in the union for us is important to know who is eligible to vote on a contract, who's eligible to be a steward or a negotiating team member. After the Ask Me Janice decision in 2017, MNP has never charged any different amount for different union members, and it's just on a month-to-month ongoing basis. So if once the member signs off that they want dues deducted, we expect those dues deductions to continue and those payments to be forwarded to the union until the employee says stop. We recognize that other unions perform differently, that they have specific time periods that the member may be signing up for a year at a time, or maybe contract duration. Our request is just an ongoing request. So as I've stated already orally, now Eric is our steward and lead negotiator. We may designate an alternate in the near future, but we'll put that in writing as soon as we come to terms. Item 4.3. So the start of this is typical union language, I think, employee bulletin boards. The last sentence here is noteworthy in 4.3. The union may use the employer's email system for communication of union matters under substantially similar conditions as it may use the bulletin board. So we recognize that we're still paper in the law office oftentimes, but most places are using electronic communication. And so our request is to use your email system for similar type notices. So if it would be appropriate to post on an employee bulletin board, it would be appropriate to post in an email to the union members that we have. Typically, we limit it to meeting notices or things of that nature. You know, a submission of a dues card and things like that. In 4.4, you know, we're not going to be out and banging on your doors saying, hey, everybody here in the city's got to be union. If somebody wants to be union, they have a right to be union, and we want to represent them. And as such, we're primarily only going to be coming on city property when we're invited. One of our union members is there and ready for a meeting and needs to discuss something with us. So we don't find the need for any significant restrictions on our activities on city property. Grievance procedure in Article 5. So as I stated earlier, we are quite familiar with essential bargaining units and arbitration. We use that tool when we need to use it. It's not a club, it's a method for resolving disputes. And our intent in this entire article is to define a procedure for us to resolve disputes as often as possible amicably. So if there's an opportunity for us to sit down and talk about whatever the issue is, whatever the problem is, we will do that. Sometimes you will see from us that we are filing a grievance, but along with that grievance, a notice or request to sit down and discuss it. Grievance procedures from our perspective define some pretty hard deadlines. And there may be from time to time that we submit a grievance where we are open to discussions on it, but that we need to file a grievance in order to preserve rights and preserve timelines. So oftentimes you will get from us a grievance, but also a request to waive timelines so that we can sit down and talk about whatever the issue is. We do like utilizing the mediation services provided by the BMS. So in step 3A, if we end up in a grievance dispute over contract language, we will frequently request of the city that they sit down and we try to mediate a resolution rather than arbitrating it. I think that's beneficial for both sides. And it needs to be voluntary on both sides. We recognize that it's a voluntary process. In step 4, that's where I was referring to making sure that our language accommodates the changes to the peace officer discipline arbitration. So in the traditional arbitration process, we get a list of 7 names, a panel of our arbitrators. In the new process for peace officer discipline, it's just a single name. You get issued an arbitrator from the BMS. The process up until that point is identical. But we will need to make sure that the language there is durable. Part of my fear, and I don't know what you've heard, Jessica, is that the process may change again. And so we want to make sure that we don't have to adjust the language in our grievance process midstream, if we can avoid that. We too want arbitrations to be a final binding decision. I note that it's in recent years, it's actually been the employers who have been appealing some of the arbitration decisions on discipline. Our preference is to make sure that the arbitration decision is binding and final. In 6.6, in answer to grievance, I want to highlight that our right is to treat a non-answer to a grievance as a denial, and we can immediately move it to the next step. In our proposed steps in 5.4, we've asked for 14 days. Some contracts provide only 10. The 14 days is intended to provide us enough time to do a diligent investigation of the matter to see what rights have been violated, if any, and to move it to the next step. If the city does not respond to a filed grievance, particularly one in writing, that and the time deadlines have expired, you will hear from us. Hey, was this an oversight, or is this an intentional non-answer? If it's a non-answer, we'll move it to the next step, whatever that step process is. Because this is a supervisory and confidential bargaining unit, we recognize that we might need to adjust the number of steps that we have. Is there going to be a committee to which we present a grievance? Do we go to Mike first as city administrator and then to a committee or some other process? But steps 1 through 4 would be our typical language there, and we'll have to have some discussion as to whether we can whittle that down and eliminate some of those steps in the grievance process. Article number 7, discipline. This is a very important article for us. Employer will discipline for just cause only. And discipline will be in one of these 5 forms. If the city punishes without disciplining, you will hear from us. But do note that when an employee calls me and they have an issue with some corrective action that's being taken, I do school them on what discipline actually is and whether it's discipline and how that's treated under statute. We acknowledge the employer's right and authority to correct bad behavior and to ensure that its policies are being enforced. But you hired them, you screened them, you promoted them into these positions. We want to make sure that they're then treated fairly in those positions and that there's no arbitrary or capricious decision-making when it comes to disciplinary issues. So generally, we want progressive discipline to mean that an employee is corrected before they're disciplined. Give them notice that, hey, I want you to do something differently in this regard. And then if discipline is necessary in order to correct the behavior, apply discipline fairly. And I don't think that's too much to ask. One thing of note in the discipline section, Jessica, you're certainly familiar with the employee's Weingarten rights and the right to have a union representative present when questioning by the employer. Because these are supervisory and confidential employees, we recognize that they're meeting laws and things that might apply. In my recent history, I've had some scenarios where rather than confuse things by having a city council member perform the investigation as a supervisory function, to have that function farmed out to an outside investigator, and then that decision or that finding is just submitted to the council. I find that an easier process, and would recommend that for a supervisory confidential group. If there is an investigation into employee misconduct, either Alec or I will be the representative for that purpose, and we would expect a reasonable period of time to set and schedule meetings. But we will make every effort to make that within a reasonable time period as well.
Joe, excuse me, I have a question for you. In
Yes.
all these documents, who exactly is the employer? Is the employer the council? Is the employer the mayor? Is the employer the administrator? Who is the employer?
I would anticipate that your answer would be that the employer is the city. So it is, when we're dealing with a county, it is the county and, for example, not the sheriff, even if you work for the department head. So it is the city acting as a whole.
But so I, as the mayor, as part of the employer, do I have the right to reprimand somebody? I got a feeling I don't, and that's why I'm clarifying this with you. Or does it all go back to the administrator and go through that chain?
I don't know what authority you've been granted under your charter, right? So I think that's a question better posed to Jessica.
Okay. I mean, I just wanted to ask that I see it here, and I'm not sure who that is. So, thanks. I'll talk to Jessica about it.
Okay. So, moving on, and I'm not sure, should have pulled up the original version that I had sent you. Are you looking at an Article 8 overtime and compensatory time?
Yep.
Okay. So we recognize that we have both exempt and perhaps a non-exempt employee or two in this bargaining unit. So I would like to highlight this article as one that needs to be addressed. As exempt employees, we recognize that most exempt employees are expected to work until the job is done, but that you want them to be able to be compensated fairly for the time that they're putting in. Some days it's a long day, and you don't get to put in for any extra time for that. But that means if there's long days, then there's probably short days on the back end. So I don't know how the city of Cross Lake handles those issues. Our expectation is that if you are hiring an employee for a 2080 year, that they're going to be putting in approximately 2080 hours, including vacation and holidays and all those other factors that apply. When it comes to non-exempt employees, and the city will have to help us understand who is exempt and who is non-exempt, but it's possible that the sergeant in particular is a non-exempt employee. What rules apply to overtime for that position? So overtime and comp time is certainly something that we're willing to discuss. As I stated at the outset of this conversation, though, our primary goal in this process this year is just to capture the existing terms and conditions. So if there are, if you accrue comp time for exempt employees at time and a half, and they get to take that time off, we would hope to capture that. So it's a bigger article, but I'm actually just going to leave it there and move on to Article 9 and holidays. So in the more updated version, I have added Juneteenth and Christmas Eve to that list. I'm not sure whether your version states that or not. It does. Great. So again, I don't need to belabor many of these points, as I think we're intending primarily just to capture existing policy. And in the version that you have, or the version I'm looking at, we have struck out 9.6. Regular part-time employees are entitled to holiday pay on a pro rata basis. I don't think we have any part-time positions within this bargaining unit, so I don't think it applies. Moving on to Article 10. Again, our expectation is that these are 2080 employees, although at times they're expected to work more. And they need to do the job as expected, right? I'm anticipating that your police chief is required to make presentation to the city council from time to time on his department and other department leaders as well. So we are not capturing any specific hours of work, just the number of hours per pay period. Article 11, sick leave. So we did make a significant modification from my initial draft in 11.2. And again, here we're just trying to capture what is in place for the employees of this bargaining unit. And that is in 11.2. In accumulation, unused sick leave may be accumulated up to a maximum of 800 hours. And then as of January 1st of each year, 50% of the employee's annual unused sick leave over and above 800 hours will be paid into the HCSP. And then on separation, all accrued unused sick time in the employee's sick leave account will be paid into the HCSP upon leaving employment with the city and eligible to receive monthly retirement benefits under PARA. So again, this is a very common provision from our perspective, where you are incentivizing people to stay with the city and not just separate from the city. And in addition to the severance amounts, we are asking for the employees to be able to designate a portion of their own earnings into the HCSP. On here, I'll note sick leave and vacation leave. It is most common for us to enter into agreements where the employees are permitted to earn above caps during the year. But there's an accounting time, and I just entered this into Carleton County, where there's an accounting date, and the accounting date being December 31st, so that on that date the balances need to be brought down to the cap, whatever that cap is. If we need new language to accommodate that, I can provide that. One thing that we have not included here is, in addition to sick leave language, oftentimes we have safety leave language specifically included. After the Women's Economic Security Act was passed in 2014, changes were made to Minnesota statute in the employment section that provided that the employees can use their own sick leave for safety leave. Most times I find that language cumbersome, and I have yet to encounter an employee who used their own sick leave for that purpose. So we're consciously omitting it here and just relying on the statute to accommodate that. But we're open to including safety leave in the provision as well. Uh, 11.5 comes up from time to time. It is our firm belief that you need to trust employees to be good employees and diligent to do their work, and that it is your right to request medical documentation to validate the use of sick leave after 3 days or more, but that generally speaking, these are supervisors and you need to trust them to do their job. If they're sick, they're sick. I haven't encountered any of those issues in a supervisory group yet. So in conjunction with the changes in the HCSP in 11.2, I've deleted 11.8 out of our initial draft. Moving on to Article 12, funeral leave. You can see our proposal here, and I think this captures city policy. I do note, though, that we've had some recent improvements in the funeral leave section, so I don't know if this is a trend coming across the state. So that might be something that we address in later years. Vacation time in Article 13. We need to obviously insert the current vacation policies and accrual rates in 13.1. In 13.3, well, we are a union, right? We want people to take the time off. It's part of one of our primary purposes of being is to ensure that people are guaranteed the right to take reasonable vacations. I don't anticipate any problems in this section. Where the request goes, we may need some further discussion on that. Who's approving the time off? Is the chief able to manage his own schedule? What does he do in order to notify Mike that, hey, I'm going to be off for 2 weeks on a fishing trip, and my sergeant is in charge? Things of that nature. Are there any other particularities in this bargaining unit when it comes to vacation leave and notice? I don't anticipate that the city would have much day-to-day involvement in the vacation leave requests. So if the chief says, look, I've got my department managed and it's time for me to take off, and here's how you can get a hold of me when I'm gone, then we can talk about how that process is actually gone through. Article 14, uniform equipment allowance. Oftentimes this applies only to the police department employees in our bargaining units. So I don't know if there is existing language in the city policy about providing equipment for the chief, or we do have eventually a new sergeant coming into this bargaining unit. I presume that position will be filled by an existing city employee, but on the off chance that it's not, might we need to accommodate a new uniform for an employee who doesn't have cross-like patches and gear and badges and whatnot. But we don't, I'm not aware of anybody else in our bargaining unit who's receiving uniform items. If there is anybody else, then we would need to accommodate that as well. Insurance. I spent most of my day yesterday working on health insurance. We recognize that the employer is in privity of contract with the health insurance companies, and that we are not. We do expect that the employer notify us if there are any changes to the plan design, if there's any changes in network, and to negotiate those changes. Primarily our interest, though, is just capturing what you have already. And certainly employer contributions toward health insurance, single and family, wherever that's at today, would be all that we're asking for. Retiree health insurance on 15.4. We're asking for 20 or more years of service. We'd ask for the same percentage premium contribution that is made on behalf of active employees for single coverage. So I believe that's 80%. Moving down to 15.7 on life insurance. We do have a request. I believe your life insurance policy is currently $20,000, and we would request a $50,000 life insurance provided to the employee. And then on for work comp, if an employee is disabled due to an injury sustained during the course and scope of performing work for the employer shall pay the full premium for health and life insurance coverage for a period of 1 year. Leave of absence, Article 16. I don't know that there's anything particularly noteworthy in these sections. Hopefully they follow what the city already has. We have taken out of our most current version the probationary period provision. As I just stated, with the sergeant position currently being open, I would anticipate that position is filled by a current city employee. But we recognize that the city may choose to go outside when it's filling positions if it can't fill it from within the existing pool of city employees. We want you to promote up from the lower positions. We encourage you to do that. But if it's necessary for the city to have a probationary period for new hires, we would accommodate that request. Seniority in Article 18. Oftentimes when we're talking about seniority in union language, it is bumping rights or ability to take vacation time. Most of these positions don't, it wouldn't apply to those positions. But on the rare occasion where we do have a layoff, we would want the laid off employee to have an opportunity to be placed in a position they're already qualified for. So oftentimes means that for example, if the city eliminated the sergeant position, well, that's a natural progression down to be placed in a patrol officer position. But somebody working for, parks is probably not going to be qualified to be laid off and placed into the sergeant position if that was presently open. So we're not requesting cross-departmental placement, but if the sergeant is laid off, excuse me. So if the sergeant is laid off, that they have an opportunity to work in any of the other positions that may or may not be open within the city to maintain their employment rather than separation. Article 19. With supervisory positions, this doesn't come up all that often, but we want to recognize that if the employee has a paid position on a committee or a council, an advisory position of some sort that's compensated, that they have an opportunity to work and to be paid in their off hours. We do want this to be their primary employment, and recognize that they need to maintain their commitments here with the city. Article 20, fitness for duty, drug and alcohol. Our primary interest in this article is to make sure that a fit for duty exam is not a tool wielded against any bargaining unit member. So if there's a legitimate need for the employer to inquire as to their medical condition, you certainly have that right, but it's only upon notice. And you're going to have good cause in order to require the employee to submit to such. I do have some agreements where the drug and alcohol testing policy is incorporated in an MOU near the end of the bargaining agreement. I don't know that that's necessary in this bargaining unit. Maybe we can just review it. And Jessica, I'll ask you now if we can get a copy of whatever is in place with the city for testing and random testing, if there is any. Article 21, wages and differentials. Here we would anticipate that we just refer to the wage scale to be placed in the back because we have a limited number of personnel in this bargaining unit. Perhaps we list them individually. I don't know if the city has a uniform class comp structure and scale in place. We're simply in this article today just looking to capture what's currently there. We do find it appropriate to have have steps and have some defined progression for employees on wages. We think that having in a city of this size a couple of steps, kind of an introductory rate, and then a step or two in order to get to top pay would be appropriate. A little bit of a carrot as the learning curve starts to come into play for an employee as they're moving into the position, to know that they can reach a higher wage in a relatively quick fashion. In addition to 21.3, where we have a longevity provision for 15 and 20 years, we are asking for a longevity of 25 years of continuous service to the city. And again, that's, in our mind, it's just something to look forward to. 1% extra pay after 25 years. Article 22, savings clause. Lawyers, we spend too much time on this type of stuff, but here it is anyway. That if something is void, that the rest of the bargaining agreement would continue on. If we have any changes to the contract that need to be entered into midstream, if we have a 3-year deal, for example, and 2 years from now, the federal government implements universal health care, then we'll probably have to sit down and modify the existing labor agreement. And then finally, duration. As I stated at the outset, we are open to how we enter into this first agreement. If we seal up 2021, if we can finish the negotiations before the end of this calendar year, we would be happy to enter into an 8-month contract followed by a longer duration contract for 22 and beyond. Assuming that the city, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but assuming that the city wants the contracts to expire at the end of the calendar year. So before I finish, I would just offer the opportunity for Alec, Dave, or Eric to chime in. If I've misstated something, please correct me, but it's kind of the summary where we're at.
I don't have anything additional to provide.
I'm good.
Yep, which is.
And it looks like Dave gave a thumbs up, so I think he's in agreement with my statement as well.
Okay. Well then, Jessica, that's all we have for now.
I do not have any questions. If the city has questions, I think maybe just because there's so much here, the best way to handle that would be, let's just move on at this point. I'll review kind of our opening proposals. And then to the extent, obviously we're going to have some review and discussion at some point here. And if I need to follow up with you on something based upon a question I get, I can certainly do that. But just in the interest of kind of moving things along here, we can briefly review what we prepared to start this process. And again, Joe and I talked about this, but for Alec, Dave, Eric, John's benefit, lots of times when we start new contract negotiations, it's hard to kind of get a handle on things because we have 20 blank pages, and where do you start, and how do you kind of get things moving? Once you do get things started, you kind of have a rhythm and you take turns and things work pretty well. So what we did just to start the process, again, understanding these are our opening proposals, our initial proposals. We will supplement these as we go along and respond to the union's proposals as well. But we did want to present an opening set to start. And what we did is sort of started at the front and the back of the labor contract. So the provisions at the beginning, like the recognition clause, hours of work, those kinds of things, and then the provisions at the end, non-discrimination, testing, those kinds of things. We recognize that we'll have to get into economic issues. It's, I think, sometimes easier to start with those non-economic issues and the language pieces and kind of develop, like I said, a rhythm and a comfort with the process and with each other, and obviously get to those things. But that was our thinking in putting together our set of opening proposals. So I did ask Mike, I did send them to Joe, and I asked Mike to provide copies to the union folks in the room, Joe, just so they would have something to look at. And a lot of this is ground that Joe covered, which is good news, I think, but I'll just, as I said, hit the highlights. What we have done in terms of format is presented individual proposals, leaving article numbers and references blank, because obviously those things sometimes get moved when you're putting the final contract together. So we have numbered proposals, but not numbered articles. So we start with the preamble recognition clause, as Joe mentioned, that comes out of the certification. Management rights, we do have a longer list than the union, which is not surprising, but we can talk about that. Proposal number 4, these are the kind of provisions that deal with the union relationship stewards, those kinds of things. Again, there were similar proposals made on the other side. Proposal number 5 deals with hours of work. Joe mentioned in his presentation, issues like having to require council meetings outside of regular work hours, et cetera. And we did capture that here. So that's something we were thinking about as well. Proposal 6, we do have a probationary period. I think with respect to a new employee, because this is a supervisory position or a confidential position, that is an important step in the process. Proposal number 7 deals with discipline in this discharge. This is similar to the language that the union was proposing with respect to kind of steps of discipline and recognition of just cause. The only, I think, item of note in proposal 7 is at the top of page 4, section 4, unexcused absences. This is language that is in one or both of the other city contracts. That's where that came from. So the city has sort of recognized absences in this way in other contexts, and we're proposing to do that here as well. Proposal 8 is the grievance and arbitration provision. Again, very similar in structure, I think, to what the union proposed. We do on page 5, section 6, have a multi-step procedure. We do reference the city administrator, the personnel committee, the council, voluntary mediation with BMS, and arbitration. So we can certainly compare, I think, the two provisions. The one thing that sort of jumps out at me as a difference would be the duration of those steps, 10 versus 14 days. So we can certainly talk about that. But in terms of structure and process, very similar. Proposal number 9, work stoppages. Again, we certainly recognize that essential employees, have interest arbitration as their remedy, but it's nice just to confirm in the labor contract kind of the union's commitment and the employer's commitment with respect to this particular issue. Proposal number 10 deals with non-discrimination. Obviously, whether the union agrees to this language or not, the city does have legal obligations not to discriminate against employees on the basis of any protected classification. I do think it's nice, though, to reference that in a labor contract and just, specifically mention it in this document. Obviously, the city has personnel policies and other things external to the labor contract, but very often employees who are covered by the contract kind of go to this document first to see, how to resolve a particular issue or concern. So I think it's important to include non-discrimination language if we can agree to that. Proposal 11 deals with drug and alcohol testing. 12 deals with handgun and firearms. We do recognize that some of the employees in this bargaining unit need to carry firearms. So we've acknowledged that there. If it's job-related use, that it wouldn't be covered. Proposal number 13, as Joe said, these are the bits at the end of the contract that nobody except he and I will be excited about, but there they are. Just kind of, again, the standard provisions at the end of the contract. So again, we are certainly reserving the right to make additional proposals, to modify the proposals we've made here, to respond to the union's proposals. But it was our hope to kind of, as I said, pick at least a set of hopefully non-controversial opening proposals that we could use just to get ourselves started in this process. Any initial questions about that?
No, I don't. Certainly we have a lot to talk about when we're looking through and comparing the various provisions. Again, I want to emphasize that we recognize that this is a group of supervisory employees working for the city, and many of whom have been there for a long time. So that the union is not here to disrupt normal operations of the city. We want to make sure that the city continues on in the good work that everybody is doing there. So I don't think that we'll have a terribly hard time coming to agreement on many of these terms. The next steps in the process, I guess, is where I would go, unless I don't want to prevent Eric or anybody else from asking questions. But I had a chance to read through it, and I've seen many of these clauses before in other contracts. So thank you for that. Okay, well, I'm hearing nothing, so are we ready to talk about next steps, Jessica?
Sure.
All right, so do we have another date set already?
We don't, and as you and I talked about initially, I've got a big team here. So I'm going to need to schedule a closed session to review the union's proposals with the city. And after that, then I'll have to prepare some kind of response, and then we could have another meeting. So just with calendars and things like that, I think at least at the beginning here, when we're going to have a lot to review and a lot to respond to, it probably makes better sense for us to get our closed session scheduled and then schedule the next negotiation session with that date in mind. If we just pick a date, we kind of have to do it in that order just to make sure that we're going to be able to be prepared and move in a logical fashion.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. Do you have any sort of ballpark? Are you thinking like a month out?
Well, what I would like to do is when we finish up today, I will have my assistant reach out and kind of start the process of finding available dates. And what we might do is look for two sets of dates. We might look for a closed session date and some negotiation dates. And when I get a sense of what that looks like, maybe I can touch base with you. You might say, I'm on vacation this week, don't bother with that week, or whatever the case might be. And you and I can just email about that. I think once we kind of get into a rhythm, we'll be all right, but there's a lot of folks, so it's going to be a little bit of a different process, and having to schedule closed meetings with notice and all of that.
Great. It would be my preference to get a couple of dates on the calendar at the same time. So if we can, now that we've got things kicked off, then we can expect a next response and a next response. And,
yep.
At some point, we'll be working off of a single document, so we can trade that document back and forth and just track revision.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think I have anything further in, and we'll just wait to hear from you, I think. In the meantime, my team will review your document, and if we are prepared to send you a response in advance, would you be interested in receiving it ahead of time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Would it be helpful to you? I think I sent you a PDF. Do you want me to send you a Word version of that?
That would be great. Yes, please.
I can do that. Okay, so for my folks, for the city folks, I appreciate everybody's time this morning. I am sure people have questions and comments, and we will schedule a meeting as quickly as we can to review those. I think what we'll do process-wise is what we did to schedule this. You'll hear from my assistant, and if you can get back to her with availability, then we can get things scheduled. So that's how we will move forward. Does anybody have any questions about process or anything like that we need to talk about before we sign off?
I have one question. Since this is an open session, is this something that we put out on our site?
It was noted, I believe, Shar, as an open special meeting.
Correct.
So you should do whatever you would typically do for that type of meeting. When we are going to meet to review proposals and formulate proposals, that is going to need to happen in a closed meeting.
So it will be on site or on our website?
Any other questions?
Nope, thanks.
Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I will follow up.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.